Good evening. I'm Marilyn Laufer, for those of you who I have not met yet, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you on behalf of our staff, advisory board, and university administration to the Jewel Collins Smith Museum of Fine Art. Most of you know that we have just reopened after 4 months of acoustical and vault space renovation, and it is wonderful to once again be able to focus on sharing the transformative power of art with our audiences. We invite you to visit our galleries this evening during the reception, where you will find significant evidence of JCSM's unique role as an outstanding visual arts educational resource for both our campus and our entire community. Tonight, we are celebrating a very special exhibition, Requiem for Mother Emanuel, which presents 9 works by Dr. Leo Twiggs made in response to the tragic murders that took place at a Bible study class at the church, Mother Emanuel in Charleston, on June 17, 2015. This is an exceptional exhibition, which I am very proud to be able to share with our audience here in Auburn. But before I introduce Dr. Twiggs, I want to acknowledge and thank the many people who have made this all possible. First, our museum staff: Scott Bishop, Chris Carr, Mike Cortez, Danielle Funderburk, Janet Gwynn, Todd Hall, Dennis Harper, Charlotte Hendricks, and Lauren Horton. If I left anyone out, please forgive me, but all of you working together have made this a most fabulous show. Dr. Twiggs said it, that it is the best installation of this work that he has seen to date, and I believe him because I believe that my team is that good. Thank you. Next, I want to acknowledge our speakers who participated in our program earlier today and thank them for the splendid job that they did. Thank you, Dr. Carr and her Mosaic Theater performers, who were wonderful, Dr. Richard Bailey, Dr. David Carter, Dr. Johnny Green, and Dr. Bernard Powers. I also want to thank the Alabama Humanities Foundation and the Auburn Special Lectures Fund for their support. Now, special thanks to Lynn Blackman and the Johnson Collection for their role in organizing this exhibition, as well as the many lenders who have given up their pieces for the show. The Gibbs Museum of Art in Charleston, Lynn and Flavia Harton, David and Grace Johnson. By the way, Mr. Johnson happens to be one of our advisory board members, and he's here in the audience tonight. Kevin and Kelly Lewis, Hugh Scogan, and Jennifer and Mac Whittle. Special thanks, of course, to Sandy Rupp and Luke DeLello of the Hampton 3 Gallery, who are instrumental in making this happen, as well as Ken Beal of Salewood Pictures for permitting us to use his documentary film in our galleries, as well as Dr. Ed Hayes, another advisory board member who actually was supportive of making that film. I might as well go ahead and thank, at the end of Dr. Twiggs's presentation, we have Drs. Persephone and William Powell, who will perform tonight. And I know that I am very grateful for them to be here for this. So now I get to introduce Dr. Leo Twiggs. I had the honor of being the curator for Leo's retrospective exhibition at the Georgia Museum of Art in 2004. And I'm going to admit to you, all of you, that I developed a huge crush on this man at that time. It's nothing for Tom Butler or Rosa Twiggs to worry about, but of course, there are very few artists in the world, and I have to admit at my age that I have worked with many of them, that I admire more than Leo Twiggs. His resume is illustrious, both as an educator and as an artist, and he has made a difference in the way I and you understand this world. He has inspired us, and he has provoked us to think about history, a sense of place, our idea of culture, right and wrong, politics and polemics, humanity and inhumanity, forgiveness and redemption. He is kind, he is gentle, he is funny, and he is deadly serious. He grew up in the segregated South, where rather than educate him as a teacher, the state of South Carolina preferred to send him to NYU to further his studies as an artist and a teacher. And there he met Hale Woodruff, who became his mentor and his teacher. And shortly after receiving his MA, he was also recruited by Lamar Dodd to be one of the 4 African-American students that was accepted into the graduate school at the University of Georgia. It was there that he received his doctorate in art education, the first African-American to do so. Dr. Twiggs not only chaired the art department at South Carolina State College, but he also was the founding director of the Standback Museum and Planetarium on the campus at the same time. Talk about somebody who likes to multitask. I mean, the thought of running a museum and being the chair of the department. His awards and accolades are many, and they range from not being asked once, but twice, to develop or to create Christmas ornaments for the White House Christmas tree. And most recently, and a tremendous honor, he was awarded the Order of the Palmetto, which is the highest honor bestowed upon a civilian in the state of South Carolina. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. Twiggs was in reference to the Confederate flag series that he began in the 1970s and in one way or another continues to this day. And he wrote about that, "As painful as this encounter was, I had to acknowledge that this was not their story, nor my story, but our story." And that is what makes his artwork so very powerful. It is ultimately about our shared stories. It is ultimately about our shared humanity. Will you help me welcome Dr. Leo Twiggs?
Thank you so much, Marilyn. And you notice that Marilyn thanked everybody. Let me thank Marilyn, because Marilyn did my first retrospective. She spent time into my studio and put together what I think launched my career to another place. You see, I worked and I painted at night and in the evenings, and my wife raised the kids. And then when I finally retired, I could go full-time in my studio. And at that time, I found out why Picasso never worked and Van Gogh never went. And so tonight, I have to thank some people as well. She mentioned earlier about the accolades I gave about the show, the way the show is hung, and I am truly blessed that the show is hung the way it is. When I did it, I thought that it had to have a dedicated space. And some people in Greenville were kind enough to do that video, which was well over $10,000 that went with it. And so it became important how it's exhibited. And it's been at the Mint Museum in Charlotte and many other places in Spartanburg, but it's never been hung more beautifully than it is here. So I am very grateful for that. Now you see, thank you. Now you see I have on a tie that you're all familiar with. I have a son that went to school at Clemson. And when I bought this tie, he said, "Dad, that is not purple, that's blue." And surely, if you're an artist, you know the difference between blue and purple. But I said I was coming here and when in Rome. And I hope he could finish the rest of that, even though he majored in computer science. Well, I want to thank Marilyn, but I also want to thank Dennis, who hung the show, which I did an excellent job. And I must admit that I would not be here and on time if I did not have Luke, who's sitting over at the end here, and Sandy, who keeps me going, lets me know when I'm supposed to be there. And then, of course, you know, I want to introduce my wife, Rosa, because if I seem to fly tonight, it is because she has always been the wind beneath my wings. So that being said, with kudos to Beth Middle, of course. And now I need to have a clicker. Do I have my clicker? They're going to bring my clicker, and I'm going to go through these paintings. But I want you to know that there is such a thing as an adventure. And art is an adventure. And in an adventure, you arrive at places. You can't go to places. Mother Emanuel is a place I arrived at. Before I show you the works there and talk about them, I want to say something about the journey there. And so the first part of this is about that journey. As early as the 1970s, I was always interested in those Confederate monuments that you see at these southern towns, always facing south, always high on a pedestal. This one is in the middle of Main Street in a town called Orangeburg. And I did that painting, and I knew it was a memorial to the Confederacy. And so what you will see here is that I tried to think about all of those Confederate soldiers that are gone. This painting was purchased by the city of Orangeburg. It is the only painting in the collection of the city of Orangeburg. And then I did a series of paintings early on where I used images along with my flags. And these two paintings were in a show that Springs Mills had, and they bought both of them. And again, you see up here, I have the old figures, and down here, the flag, and up here, the flag and the old figures. Now, if you notice that area around there, that's because the technique I use is batik. Batik is a wax resist technique that is not used for painting. It is used to decorate textiles, and people decorate textiles and make clothing out of it. I was fascinated with it. And the whole idea was, how do you control the crackles to make them work as plastic elements in the composition? And nobody else was doing it. So I read up on everything I could. I was introduced to this at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was in a crafts class, and the woman had a scarf on each side of her skirt. And she'd come in and switch around, and the scarf would blow in the wind. And I said, Miss Gray, what is that? He said, that's batik. We'll get to that later on. And she finally introduced it to me. I fell in love with it, brought it back to my high school class, and they did it, and they did all kind of stuff. They would never follow the rules, but they did a lot of nice looking stuff. And so I became interested in making it a painting technique. And these are mounted on hardboard. I had to find a way to mount it on hardboard. And this is unbleached muslin, not silk. And to show you how experimental it is, the reason this is like that because I was working, I put it in the freezer, because I'd put it in the freezer to get the wax and have to crush it. And I put it in the freezer and stayed in about 3 weeks. And when it came out, it had those real nice crackles. And then I found out, now if you get real nice crackles, you let it stay in there for 3 weeks. So it was always that way. And then I started doing the flag by itself, because I found out that I could express myself fully by doing the flag without using images. And this is called cotton flag. Sometimes I change the color of the flag, because in the South, cotton was king, so I called this cotton flag. But I found out that if you change the way you look at things, the things you look at will change. So what I have done sometimes is I have maintained the St. Andrew's cross, but I have simply changed the color. This is in the collection of the Greenville Museum. And here's another one. This was published in NYU's journal. And I think the writer says it looks like blood dripping all over it. I think people get a little dramatic to that. But the texture that you see here is patterned material, like the flag that is in the show there. Sometimes I use patterned material because it gives it a model effect. The whole idea of my flag is that, suppose you had a great-grandmother, great-grandfather who was a general in the Civil War, and you, as a second or third generation, happen to open that trunk and you pulled out that flag, how would it look? Would it fall apart in your hands? It's antique, it's old, it's an heirloom. But that's not the way those flags look that we see today. They are pristine as if they were printed yesterday, as if the war has not ended. And in many cases, in the minds of many people, it has not. And then I did a series called Targeted Man. And that was started in the 80s, the flag in the 70s. And Targeted Man is about people who are targeted. When I was growing up, the Ku Klux Klan targeted African American communities to intimidate us. They would have bonfires and burning crosses and in the woods, and because they believed that African Americans were scared of ghosts, and so they looked ghostly in that. And you didn't know who they were. They could be people you worked for every day. In fact, my brother was in the car with a fellow taking him to the store where he worked, and she said, look under the seat and give me something. He picked under the seat and pulled out the hood of a Confederate. He said, put that back. We didn't know he was one of them. Sometimes they wore plaid shirts that they each knew, but we didn't know. And that's what we had to go through. But then 9/11 came. And when 9/11 came, we were all targeted. And so in my paintings, I explore that thing. Are they friend or foe? You don't know. You don't know. You might know that one, but you don't know. And so the Targeted Man series, and this is one where I call Targeted Man Emerging, because you see these people simply emerging out of the darkness. You don't know whether they're friend or foe. And what was always heart-stopping to me, that sometimes our children were targeted. Early in my career, I did mother images, a lot of figures with this figure. But when they became targeted, and then there are sinister figures back there, and sometimes because they were targeted, their lives were really designed to go nowhere before they got started. Now, I know you're wondering about that chicken, because this is called Evening of the Rooster. When I was growing up, we had chickens on the yard. And while I was at NYU, Woodruff would say, we African Americans need to develop our own symbols. He said Picasso used the bull and the cow that came from his Spanish culture. We need to find our own. Well, the only ones I knew was cows, chickens, and things like that. But I found out that roosters are, they're the leaders of the barnyard. So the rooster, for me, became that dominant figure, that dominant thing. Now, I know you're thinking about the Game Scouts. Don't think about that. We did that joke earlier. But this is, so in some of my paintings, I'll have a rooster, or sometimes I'll have a bull, or sometimes I'll have a cow, because I simply believe we have to develop our own symbols. And then all of that led to Mother Emanuel. And when I got there, you see, I had been exploring those for years. And then one night, I'm sitting down in my living room, and the radio and television came on and said there has been a shooting in Charleston. And then later on, it came on and it said it was at a church. And later on, it came on and said there have been fatalities. And later on, it came on that there were 9 fatalities. And he had gotten away. I was struck by it because I knew people there. I was born just 45 miles north of Charleston, a little town called St. Stephen's. A lot of my art teacher was a member of the church. I had been to a funeral there early on. And so that first thing I did was this painting. And this was number 1. And what I did here was down here I included this cross to hang around the neck. And in here you can't see it, but there's a brooch. something that my grandmother always wore, and I knew she'd be a part of the church. And other part of this is in here. I have velvet. You'll see it in the work there. And I had to have some old velvet. There's not an old church that doesn't have old velvet. You got to have some velvet. So I couldn't find any, and finally went to a thrift store, found an old pillow, tore it up, and that's how I got that. This stuff that you see around here was what I tried to remember was what that floor must have looked like. The blood-stained floor where these people were killed, the stain, the horror of that. And so I tried to reproduce that in the target. Now, we know the church was targeted, and he even said that he wanted to start a race war, so he wanted to make sure that he got something important. This is a church that goes back to Denmark, Vesey. Now, you heard about that yesterday. Bernard talked about that, how important this church was and why he picked the church. And so then the next painting, and I just did it because it was time to do another one, was the flag. So here you have the target, and then you have the flag. And the flag, too, that's staining as if this blood is on the floor. And when somebody dies, policemen mark a spot with an X. And so here you see the X's and the spots, and with dye, I could splatter the paint so that you get that feeling of something slashing or something bleeding, and then the figure 9, and always the silhouette of the church. And then the third one came. Now, the first one was purchased by an architect whom I met and came here. We're going to take a photograph together afterward, and I'm glad that he's here. And then the second one was purchased by one of the persons who had bought some of my paintings before. And he said, well, if he ever does anything with a Confederate flag about the church, I want it. And at the time, I was working on one, and so it went immediately. And then I had a good friend that Marilyn referenced, Jennifer Whittle, who was on the board of Spoleto, and said, I've seen the stuff that they got in auction for the benefit of that. They don't have anything like you do. You got to do something, and I wanted you to give it to us so that I could auction it off. Well, I don't give my paintings away. That's not good, because they want to auction it off, and the price is going to be lower than the price that gets at my garage. Somebody's going to get mad. But Jennifer was persuasive, especially since her husband was on the board of USC, and he was the one who escorted me down the aisle when I got my honorary degree. So I said, I'll give you something. And I gave her the smallest thing I had, because that was a small. This is 14 by 19. And about 3 days later, she came back and she said, do you know that it sold for $14,900? And why don't you consider doing 9? Now, I was not considering doing 9, even though $14,500 was good, and I didn't get a dime of that. But it just takes me so long to do a work. The average work that you see out there would take between 3 weeks and a month. And we needed to do all of this stuff by June, because that was the anniversary. So, but 9 intrigued me, if you noticed that I had 9 on the other paintings. And so in this particular work, you see the 9 X's there, and you see the flag that we talked about earlier. And so I started this afterward. And if you notice, the stain is there, the church is bigger, and it's getting smaller. And I did not decide to do a series. I didn't plan it out, I'm going to do this one and do this one and do this one. To me, each painting became a testimony. And you can't have a testimony unless you have a test. And for me, the test was, how do I say something about this tragic incident? And so, as I worked in this one, there's staining, the X is there. It's rather austere, and there are different color X's. Somebody said, Different colors of X's because they were different people, different ages. I don't know. I think sometimes people just can read things into it. And who knows? But I know they were different colors. For me, it was, I had to match up something with something else. And then with the next one, if you notice that the blood is not so prominent now. The red is not so prominent. The other thing is this is pattern material. This is some kind of material that I remember going to the store with my mother and grandmother, and she would say, her name was, my grandmother's name we called Bing, and she would say to my mom, who was Bertha, "Oh, Bertha, isn't this a pretty piece of material?" And I remember that kind of calico kind of material, and I found some at Walmart. And you have to wash it, and it took the dye beautifully. And now Walmart doesn't have any more of it because I bought all of it. But there's a textured pattern to it. And I think it says so much about the era that this symbol represents. And if you see this, there is a cross. And when I did the stars, I can tell you, if you count the stars, I did not plan that. It was just that I was doing it, and it just came out. As I said, each became a testimony. Then I knew I had to go inside the church, because the church outside was pristine and white, as you saw earlier on. But this church dates back to the 1800s, 1900s. How would you have that kind of pristine quality on the inside? And the inside is a different place. It's steeped with history. There's a window that rises almost 30 feet behind the altar. And I thought, these people every Sunday sat in those pews and saw that window. And perhaps this was their portal to the Almighty. And so if you notice, the mood of this has changed. I was also moved by the regal appearance of those bishops that stood next to Barack Obama when he was there. There was something almost African-esque regal about the way they looked. And so I tried to capture that in the coloring. And of course, if you see here, this is a peep of our South Carolina, Palmetto, and the moon, the indigo there. And there were 9 of these here. But here, where I used the top of the window, these crosses now seem to be ascending. And I don't know, I think Mac Whittle is the one who brought this one. His wife is the one who got me into this, and he's the one who got this one. And then when I got to this one, 7, you know, you get to a place where you say, you know, what can I say now? And I'm bound. And I thought this may be a kind of place where I reflected as I think about it, because here you see a semblance of what was the flag, and then you see the target, and then you see the number, and then you see the ascendants. And this is a larger flag, and somebody said, and I suspect I was thinking about that, the pastor of that church who was killed, Senator Pinckney. And there's no sky with blue in it here. There was just this ascending, and this is also from the earlier interior that I saw. So here you see kind of exterior and interior. But what's important about this is there were 12 people in that church, and 9 of them were killed. And so this is a kind of homage to those persons who survived, because I knew I had to say something about them as well. And then at this time, I've just thought that if those souls were ascending, then they were targeted here with this circle, and they were entering heaven with that circle. And as an artist, when you use circles, circles tend to grab you. And when you put two of them in there, it creates all kinds of design problems. So I made this the circle before, and this the circle after. And this piece also has something of my experimental nature, because you see the line there, and you see the lines here, and you see those edges. I couldn't make those edges until 3M invented frog tape. And I could lay the tape on fabric, and it would not bleed through. So as I said, this is all experimental, and here I was doing that. And so here you have the 9X's still there, here, and now they are transformed to that. Now you get to a point when you're doing this, and while I was doing this, my gallery director was always say, "How many you got now?" I have 2 in the studio, she'd come and get them. 3 in the studio, she'd come. 1 in the studio, she'd come. And she's got to drive 2 hours and a half from Greenville to get them. She just came down and she got them. So it got to the point where I wouldn't tell her when I finished. And so these last 3, I just kept in the studio. And then I had to find out, how would you end this? You know, when you're on a journey and you're doing something, you have to find out, how would you end it? Handel ended with the Messiah, with the Hallelujah chorus, and it was so moving that people stood up. And I can't sing and can't write music, so I couldn't do a Hallelujah chorus. But I wanted to say something more than just 9 paintings. I wanted to tell people that there's nothing really unique about Mother Emanuel. As much as you think how painful it is that the flag came down in South Carolina, that Mother Emanuel is the stony road we trod. It is what has happened here in Alabama with 4 girls. It is what happened in Charlotte, North Carolina. It is what happened with Trayvon Martin. It is what happened with Emmett Till. It's happened then, and it will happen again, unless we do something about it. It is the stony road we trod. And then I heard, maybe in my sleep, just wrestling around with this thing, these words from Lift Every Voice and Sing. You know, Lift Every Voice and Sing is sometimes called the Negro National Anthem. But I think what you ought to do is read the words, because the words say so much about us, about our redemptive nature. And while I was doing this, although these paintings are testimony, they stand alone, it is so moving that when you put them together, I too had to take that journey from the slaughter and the pain of those targets and the blood that from the flag to this place. And so I had to say, here, these words, we have come over a way that with tears has been watered. And how do you say words, write words in a painting? Because words sometimes soak up the painting, you don't see the other part of it. How do you say that? And how do you say one soft and the other louder? So what I did with it, if you notice, the color of this is softer than the color of that. And then here I wanted to say something about where we have come from, the African continent. And I thought when I was doing this, because this show first started in Charleston, in the City Gallery. City Gallery is right across the way from where the slave ships. I could look out the windows of that gallery and see where the slave ships arrived. And they had my show in that gallery, and that gallery has 3 floors, and my show was the only show in the gallery. They cleared out everything. And I thought, what was it like for these slaves to have traveled for months in the holds of a slave ship, and finally being brought up and looking around at this new place that they have never seen before. The sun doesn't rise in the same place. They don't see anything that they are familiar with. And yet, they were just beginning their long and agonizing journey into the night. And so I wrote from that with this flag just above the horizon. And I can tell you, I didn't plan it that way. I don't know how it got there. It may well be that they looked out and they saw that cross. And that is what has sustained us as African Americans to this day. I don't know. But I know that we have come over a way that with tears has been watered. And we have come, as the mother Emanuel has shown us, treading a path through the blood of the slaughtered. Thank you.
Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place where which our Father sighed. We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered, straddled beneath high the sea has stand, where the bright gleam of a bright star is spread. Would you please stand now and sing the last verse with us? God of our weary, God of our weary years, God of our sorrow. thou who has led us thus far on the way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, lead us forever in thy path, we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met. Lest our hearts, for it will the wine of the world, we forget thee, shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land, true to our God, true to our native land.
Ladies and gentlemen.